So what does it take to be successful in franchising? There's a term called franchise relations, which is always how do the franchisors communicate to the franchisees, and how do the franchisees give feedback to the franchisors?
Welcome to Fordify Live with your host, Ford Saeks.
So an expert on this topic, on franchise relations, when I'm thinking about doing this episode today, I thought I need to get my friend and colleague. We're on the speaking circuit together. We spoke at conferences together. We've even done conferences together. Evan Hackel, welcome to Fordify Live. We are live right now on Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube and on the Business Growth Podcast. And so just if you're listening, you can find him at evanhackelspeaks.com. It's let me start over. It's EVAN. Hackel, Evan Hackel, speaks.com. Evan, welcome to the show.
It's great being here, and this is literally my favorite business topic. So I love talking about franchise relations.
Well, what do you see? I mean, tell me a little bit about your background in franchising, and then what makes you an expert on the topic?
Well, I started in franchising literally in the late 70s, early 80s, videotape rental store franchising. I've started 3 franchise businesses. I took over, and probably the most dynamic and interesting experience of my entire life is I took over a bankrupt franchisor called Flooring America. And those franchisees were very, very, very unhappy. And as part of the deal, there were 202 franchisees. Every franchisee could be let out of their contract at the end of the year. They could stay in the flooring business. They just had to change their name. So I had a year to win them over. And what I learned about the importance of leadership in franchising, listening, and having franchisees' voices being heard was transformational for me. And I've taken that and applied it to the hundreds of franchise consulting customers I've had and what I've done in speeches, etc. And sort of the key things that I've learned is, one, franchisees actually know a lot.
Yes.
And need to be respected and need to be heard. And that there tends to be this ivory castle syndrome that franchisors have, where they think that it's weak to ask the franchisees their opinion, get their advice. You want to have a relationship where both parties are listening to each other and both parties are playing the same game, all trying to win. That's really critical. The next thing that's really critical is for a franchisee to understand that the relationship isn't just between them and the franchisor. What they do impacts every other franchisee. So when I don't show up at a conference, or I'm not reading my email, I'm not paying attention, I'm not playing the game, I'm really hurting every other franchisee, not just my franchisor or not just myself. And that is something that most franchisees don't get because they see their relationship as between them and the franchisor. And then the third thing that I learned is if your goal is to make all the franchisees happy, then you're not going to lead them into the difficult things they need to do to make their business successful. And
Absolutely.
a lot of times I work with people and I look at their franchise surveys and they're proud, they get great satisfaction. And then I go, well, what aren't you asking them to do? Because if there isn't a degree of friction, you're not moving the ball forward. And as you know very well, if you're not innovating, you're dying.
Absolutely.
So you have to be moving forward. And that means some people are going to be uncomfortable.
Now, for those of you listening, we've got business owners, we've got executives, we've got all different types, not just in franchising, but the concept is the same. So whether it's franchise relationships as a franchisor to the franchisee, or if you're a franchisee, how do you make your voice heard more in the franchise brand? Or if you're in business, think about your relationships with your customer. So the same thing applies to that customer experience, that franchise relationship experience. And also, since we are recording, this is for educational and informational purposes only. We're not giving you legal advice. We're having a conversation as critical thinkers because there's so much disruption right now in the buying process. There's increased competition. There's supply chain issues. There's the supply chain and the cost of goods have changed. Buyer behaviors have changed. There's different generations in the marketplace. And then you've got as far as franchising, you've got sometimes single unit owners, multi-unit owners, multi-brand owners, different territories. Your franchise territory could be different. So whatever place you work in the business world, these concepts still apply. So let's get into what are some of the top challenges. I know you talked about, the things that a franchisee might not do, which is showing up, participating, communicating. We talked about a couple of things the franchisor might do wrong, which is that ivory tower syndrome, my way or the highway, and there's not a two-way dialogue going on to really help. And then, of course, we brought up the term in franchising that can be a double-edged sword, innovation. See, when I first started speaking, Evan, to franchise brands 3 decades ago, I was known as the business growth innovator. But then I found out that if I used the word innovation, franchisors were like, no, we want them to follow our systems. We don't want them to be innovative. So now for the last 3 decades, I'm the business growth accelerator, but we do need to be innovative, but still follow our systems. So what are some of the things that you work with on a franchise side to help them improve the relationships with their franchisees?
Well, one of the biggest things that I do is really help them understand how to create good communication within the system. And, working with franchisors around their franchise advisory councils, creating regional networking groups of franchisees, creating committees that work on different aspects. So I like it if you're the head of marketing in a franchise, you're a VP of marketing, senior VP of marketing, you should have your own marketing council made up of franchisees. And by the way, sometimes, like when I was a franchisor, I like to say I had councils on everything, but I actually had councils, like I had a sales council that were made up of employees of the franchisees to contribute, to give ideas, because they were actually doing sales. Right. They were waiting on customers. My franchisees were not waiting on customers. So it was super important that we had, the real world people doing those things. So I try to take franchise systems to the next level so they're really communicating. And one of the biggest problems in franchising is that the franchisees aren't playing. They aren't reading the messages. And the solution appears to be more. Okay, they're not reading the emails. I'll send them 5 times as many, and that's not the answer. That's not the solution. And one of the things I love getting franchisees to do is to meet with each other. So, like one of the things that I help franchisors do is create regional networking groups where their franchisees get together without management, without any representative of the company. And I know I'm scaring all kinds of people. My goodness, my gracious, the franchisees are going to stop. But what happens is now you all of a sudden have a group that's masterminding, encouraging each other, giving each other the support that's necessary. And they're declaring to each other what they're going to do and what they're going to achieve. So it's not like they're meeting willy-nilly. We're actually teaching the leaders of these groups how to be effective leaders and how to really take their groups and make real masterminds out of their groups. And the more, I'm going to share a statistic. I think this is really important. When I was running a franchise system, we noticed that the franchisees that were members of our advisory councils were growing at about a 30% rate, where our system was growing at an 8% rate. So what was the difference between the members of the advisory council and the members that weren't? And we realized that there were 2 major differences. One was they felt ownership because they were contributing to the ideas, to the planning of the business. And 2, they actually knew what was going on because so many other franchisees did not know what was going on. So that's when we came up with this idea that we got to get as many people as engaged as possible. So we created about 8 or 9 different advisory councils. So we had a training advisory council, we had an innovation advisory council, marketing advisory council, you name it, we had a council for it. And then we literally, because we had a large number, we created 36 regional networking groups. And each one of those groups had a leader and a deputy leader. So now we had 36 of them. Now we had 72 people in leadership, and they would all meet, the leaders of these groups would all meet once a month with our team, where we talk about the agendas and what was going to happen in the next month. You had all the members of these committees, and all of a sudden we had about 40% of the entire system of franchisees in some form of leadership role. And it's a total game changer. Totally changes how the whole system works. And then we define what the expectation of a franchisee is. So I love to do a monthly all hands meetings with all franchisees, and every franchisee should be there.
Yep.
And the other thing I love doing is stopping the ability of employees to email every franchisee. You need to have a central communication person who decides what and when communication goes out, and replicating the same information over and over and over again is the surest way to get people to stop reading.
I think that's so important, in franchising. And again, you guys, even if you're not in franchising, you can still take takeaways from this episode. So maybe you're a small business owner. Do you have an advisory council? I know I have an advisory council of like-minded, critical thinking people that will call me on my crap, that will give me feedback. And so sometimes you need a little bit of that. Surround yourself with that tough love. And if you're someone who's, thinks you know it all, that's the scariest person in the world. Is those people who think they know everything and don't know what they don't know are scary. So the reason you want to have either a franchise advisory council or a council for sales or training or supply chain or not supply chain, but so much the products and services that you offer, the customer experience, net promoter score, whatever. It's because you want to engage them and you want to get those two-way communications, because it's that one idea that can make the difference. That's why the people that were engaged were growing at 30% as opposed to those that were maybe on the sidelines. And, unfortunately, every time I get hired to speak at a franchise brand, we do the pre-event meeting with their executive team. And then I meet with their franchise advisory council, if they have one, their area developers. And then I mystery shop the franchisees. And it's interesting how the brand has a belief that all their franchisees think one thing, but then you talk to the franchisees and there's this gap, which is what you're talking about with franchise relationship. And so open communication is critical. What Evan's sharing, and if you've joined the episode late, it's Evan Hackel at Evan Hackel, just like it sounds, Hackel Speaks, evanhackelspeaks.com. And he's our guest today. Known as a problem solver. He's been in franchising for decades and really shortens the gap between the franchisor and the franchisee and helps them improve their top line revenues as well as their efficiencies in their system. Not only has he had experience as a franchisor, but in franchising. And that's where I met him first, was at a conference that we did together. And then, of course, members of the International Franchise Association. And, we speak on the circuit. So we know that they're supposed to create a council. They know they're supposed to have open communication. What are some ways that you've helped other franchise brands engage their franchisees who might be on they're either in the system a long time, and because you know how franchising grows, I'm going to set the stage. So there's these magic numbers, 25, 50, and 100. If they read 100 units, they're kind of at that magic number. And the same systems and communication that they used under 100 units isn't what they use over 100. And then there's franchise brands that have thousands of units, or they're part of a multi-brand group. And so I want you to think about those brands, regardless of what size. How do they engage their franchisees? Let's say they've got franchisees that have been in the system a long time. Maybe there's a leadership change, an ownership change, or just the dynamics of the business has changed. And now they need to get their franchisees re-engaged. What do you recommend? Obviously, you talked about the regional events, but what else would you recommend a brand do?
Well, I think there are a couple things that are really critical. First is to really understand what motivates people. So a lot of people just assume everyone gets motivated by making a lot of money, but that's not true. And certain people buy a franchise system and they're making enough money, they're happy, they don't necessarily want to work harder, and they are maintaining their business, they're not growing their business. And this is a major problem in franchising. And you tackle this problem in a lot of different ways. But one of the ways I really like to tackle this problem is by connecting to their ego and what drives them within the context of the system. So I work, for instance, with an after-school program where a lot of the people were just delighted that they were doing work after school and they weren't focused on growing their business. So when I interviewed all their, key franchisees, it became very clear to me that the real driver of this franchise system was the fact they were impacting kids' lives. So we took on their badges at convention and put lives impacted and how many kids they had in the program. And the whole idea was to promote those people that were having more impact. Now, all of a sudden, instead of focusing on, well, I want to double my business because I'm going to double my profits or triple my profits, was I want to grow my business because I'm going to have more impact on kids because that's what I did it for. In terms of individual franchisees, the importance of goal setting with the franchise business consultant, not just goal setting per se in terms of what you want to do with your franchise, but where do you want to go in your life? What do you need for retirement? What are you trying to accomplish? So that they can tie in the financial results with their life goals, which tends to make people want to really go to that next level. It's super important. And one of the most important things, and we talked about these regional networking groups, is for people to literally state what their goals are in front of other people.
Yep.
Because when you go around a table and say, okay, when are you going to get this program rolled out? I'm going to do it by next Thursday. I'm going to do it by next Friday. What is your goal? What are you attending? What's your accomplishment going to be? The minute you state it publicly to peers, you have a vested interest in making it happen. I like to refer to, because I've been on a few diets in my life.
Yes, me too.
I have I have had secret diets, where you're going to go on diet, you're going to lose 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 10 pounds before you tell people you're dieting. And then, the diet becomes the manana diet where I'll start tomorrow, I'll start the next day, I'll start the next day. But the times I've really lost weight is when I've told everybody I'm going to lose weight because everyone's looking at me. And I'm going, okay, now I've really got, I put my stake in the ground.
I agree.
And as soon as I said stake in the ground, I realized the one thing that's really super important is having a vision that is impactful to the entire franchise system of where and why the system is going to where it's going.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Yeah, even the president's message, right? When we go speak, usually if we're the opening keynote presenter, they'll do the state of the update. They'll do the president's message. And it's really important that the brands that I see that are really growing have that real clear vision. And, as an organization, even if you're, again, I'm going to reference this because we've got listeners that aren't in franchising, even if you're not in franchising, having that vision for your employees, because some employees, especially the younger generation, they're not motivated necessarily by money. Right? They're working to play. They're not working to make money. They're working so that they can have more time off, more flexibility, and so forth. And so really understanding your customers, their needs, your employees' needs, and if you're a franchisor, understanding your franchisees' needs and tying it to those emotional benefits. And that's what Evan's really sharing is what you're motivated by as a franchisor or as the business owner is not necessarily what they're motivated on. And so, really understanding the personality styles and the driving forces in it is so essential, I think.
Yeah. Well, and, you talked about this before. Whenever I speak, the most important thing is that I know the business well enough that I'm being relevant to the people talking. Because when you hire a speaker who gives the same exact speech in front of every different group, it's not as impactful. But you want the audience to realize that you know the business well enough that what you're saying is literally relevant to them.
So important.
One of the, I give a whole bunch of different speeches. Some are about teamwork and better together. Some are about the journey to excellence is a never-ending journey that you're constantly getting better. But one of the things I really like to get people to do when I get done my speech is write down your commitment. What are you going to do from this presentation that's going to be different? And sometimes I'll just literally have them send out an email or send out a text and declare it right then and there. Because, and this is, true also in a franchise system, whether, in my speech, is because my goal in my speech isn't to make people feel good. And I know that I want them to feel good. My goal is to make an impact in everyone's life that I come in contact with. That's what I want to accomplish. So I know that after I speak, particularly because you're right, most of the time I'm first day right after the state of the franchise speech. By the time the third day comes and they're leaving, what did they really remember from Evan? But the same thing is true at a franchise convention. When a person leaves, and when I work and consult on formatting the conference itself, I have a worksheet for the franchisees to fill out. So when they go home, they've actually filled out their action plan. And if it's something that is, quote, an initiative, that page is already pre-built for them.
Yes.
But if it's something that they've talked to people and, I've got to really now do this, then they create that. So it's their plan. And then the business consultant sees that plan. Their regional networking group sees their plan. So it's all out in the open, and everyone's invested in making it happen.
Yeah, I do the same thing. When I do it, I look at, as a speaker, timely, topical, and relevant, golden nuggets. I want them to have actionable takeaways that are relevant that they can actually put into use. I work on the 3 levels of mindset, strategies, and tactics. Strategies, following their systems. Mindset, obviously, be open-minded, critical thinker, take control of your time, those types of things. And then, of course, the tactics. What do they actually do different? And that's why they bring in outside speakers. Well, Evan, I really appreciate you sharing some expertise today. We go live, everybody, Wednesdays at 11 a.m. Central on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. And our guest today is Evan Hackel at Evan Hackel Speaks, Hackel Speaks, Evan, EVAN, excuse me, I'm talking too fast. And any closing thoughts as we get ready to wrap up this episode?
I guess I'd give a closing thought and just say this. Being a lifelong learner is the key to success. Listening to this podcast every week is being a lifelong learner. And I challenge people to commit to themselves to their growth, make this podcast part of that growth.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to Fordify Live. Make sure to like, comment, and share this episode on your favorite social media platform. And don't forget to subscribe to the Business Growth Show podcast, available wherever you get your podcast streaming fix. We air weekly at 11 a.m. Central Time. So until next week, keep pushing the boundaries and never stop growing.